GIDEON, thanks for being here. I've been chatting to the guys at SATSA, the African Tactical Shooters Association, and we were talking about this bill that Nedlike's trying to push through. And one of the guys they said you need to chat to is you. And excited to talk to you today and hear what you have to say. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. And it's a very important sort of hot button issue right now. I would summarize it by saying it's probably one of the single most important developments regarding the future of private firearm ownership in South Africa and all of the other aspects that flow out from that, which has the implications on private and national safety and security. So it's a big deal.
GIDEON, give me an elevator pitch of who you are, where you come from, and what your background is, where it relates to firearms and time on the range.
So myself, I've been a gun owner since about 2011, 2012. And I've had dedicated sports shooter status for about as long. So it's about close to 13 years now. That was when I was still flying for the airlines, which came to an end in 2020. I was at one time for about 4 years and then at Mango. And I really enjoyed that, but it didn't obviously had much to do with guns. That was the aviation side, and then there was the firearm ownership side. Then lockdown happened and all the implications of that. So among some of the things I started pivoting into was professional level firearm instruction. And I got the qualification and I started doing that. Although on an amateur level and on a sort of, not quite a side hustle, but because I was more interested in a hobby than it was a profession, I have been involved in sort of private firearm instruction since about 2015 onwards. It was a rational sort of step and pivot, I think, to something new. And following on the heels of that was getting my necessary CERA grades, and I started consulting in the private security industry as well. So that's been a big pivot, but I have been involved in the gun policy debate since about 2014 when I first started my own website. And what led to that was the whole Oscar Pistorius thing, which happened actually shortly after I became a legal gun owner. And I thought, there's a lot of propaganda being pushed to the general public that are pitching at them a perverted and inaccurate and unrealistic view and image about what private firearm ownership in South Africa is, what our gun culture is. And the only way you actually rectify that and push back against it is by providing the alternative view, the realistic view, the one that's based in fact and reality. And that was the intention all along.
And it seems to be a reoccurring fight. We know that Nedlike is trying to push through a bill that had previously been platformed and rejected without any amendments to it. They seem to be trying to push through that same amendment to the bill. Can you start to tell us perhaps what the bill entails, the history behind it, and maybe what's happening behind the scenes that listeners may not be aware of?
Absolutely. So this bill originated in 2021, which was pretty much a bad year to try and pass a very restrictive and negative piece of gun control legislation because the July 2021 riots happened, right? And I think labeled the most destructive public unrest in South Africa's history. The footage, the images, the burning warehouses, all that stuff, it was visceral imagery. It was in everyone's house. Everyone was aware of it. I think people forget just how panicked and stressed the general public was, especially those communities that were at the front line of the violence. And the fact that many of them at that point, didn't see a police vehicle in the better part of a week. They were completely left to their own devices and on their own. And if it weren't for the communities that were organizing within themselves and amongst themselves and building sort of mutual assistance networks that were backed up by people that were legally armed, that could actually protect property, they could protect neighborhoods, businesses, and innocent life, the situation in all likelihood would have looked vastly different, because what happened in 2021 is the state evaporated. It just did not have the capacity to deal with the scale and the intensity of that public violence. And that's where the last line of defense, being the general public, became the first line of defense. So it was one of those great situations where events trumped debates, because the lived experience just made people realize, hang on a second, we want to probably implement the strictest gun control regime in this country's history by making the existing one worse. After this happened, there's no way. So a few things happened. This bill saw the light of day in 2021. Amongst other things it tried to do, it was an overt ban on self-defense as a reason to be or to own a firearm. So you could no longer own guns for self-defense. It put extremely restrictive numerical limits on dedicated sport shooters and dedicated hunters. I'll explain a little bit about the detail on that later because it's important. But that would have just decimated the sport shooting and hunting industries and have extremely negative impact on agriculture and conservation. There were just general massive big implications on this. And now the big problem with a bill like this is it needs, your first question is, well, what problem is this trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
And there was really no answer to that. So if you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, and then at least it needs to have a foundation based in research, right? Which it also didn't. So the bill was published with no indication of what research forms a foundation for the contents of it. Then we managed to, and by we, I'm referring to the general firearm representative fraternity altogether, like numerous organizations, managed to get a hold of a study done by the Wits School of Governance in 2015 that was commissioned by the Civilian Secretariat for Police. And this Wits report, or Wits study, as I'm just going to colloquially refer to it, looked at the effects of the Firearms Control Act of 2000 between the year 2000 and 2014, so that 15-year period, to see what impact did it have on crime and violence in South Africa. And the findings were initially actually to me surprising, but then the more you think about it, the actual more rational they became, in the sense that it firstly found, its most important finding, that the Firearms Control Act of 2000 had no meaningful impact on violent crime rates at all, or murder. The thing that did have the impact was the level and strength of policing. So if we're in a year where there was a very high level of strong policing in South Africa, that immediate violent crime rates immediately responded to that, and they declined. In years where policing became weak or less strong, there was at a lower level, then violent crime rates increased. And as the South African Police Service began its collapse post the FIFA World Cup in 2010, you see that year-on-year, almost chronic rise in violent contact crime rates and crime and violence, and it directly correlates with findings of that report. So firstly, it found that it didn't have any impact. Secondly, it found that lawful firearm owners, the demographics, we're talking about socioeconomic status, age, sex, that sort of thing, does not overlap with the demographic that are committing the crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So your legal gun owner
Are not the ones that are committing the crime.
are not the ones committing the crimes.
Is it fair to say that most of your violent crime, when a firearm is used, that it is a stolen or illegal firearm almost every time?
It is. And the source of those firearms is also a fun topic to discuss. So let's definitely put a paper clip in that, or a pin in it, because we need to return to that part. Ultimately, at the end, one of the more important conclusions and findings is it recommended that, and this was the exact wording, that the authorities shift their misplaced focus on amending gun control legislation and focus on policing. So essentially, this huge report, 178 pages, massive research, high quality, said there is no research or scientific basis for further amendments to the firearm control legislation. The focus should really be on fixing policing, because the current legal system, the current law, works well when there's strong policing to implement it, and it does absolutely nothing the moment policing is absent.
2015, this report comes out, which says making further amendments, stricter gun control policy is not going to see any results. You misguided, your attention's misplaced. Let's look at policing.
Yeah.
2021, they try and push through this amendment. 2025, they're going at it again. Why, if not to try and curb crime, if the research is saying it's not related, why do you think they're trying to push this bill through? What is the agenda?
Well, it's a very blatant civilian disarmament agenda. And I think what explains that that's the fact is that the preamble of the amendments changes the actual preamble of the original Firearms Control Act of 2000. And it tells you that the intent of this legislation is to restrict civilian access to firearms for the purposes of enhancing or safeguarding public order. So this is no longer about enhancing safety and security, or the security of person, or enhancing the right to life of the private individual.
Yeah.
It's really to protect public order, which is telling me, okay, does this infer that the state views lawfully armed civilians as a threat to public order, meaning they are worried about us becoming seditious, or what was that great word that flared up in 2019? That we're going to perform some form of insurrection, which is the biggest load of poppycock I've ever heard. But clearly, that is the framing of which this draft amendment is supposed to get its legitimacy from.
So government is afraid that they're going to enact some kind of laws and that the public's not going to like it. And they're afraid the public might just rise up, and they want to make sure that that's not a possibility.
That is probably the case. And what makes it interesting is for all their talk about the threat from the right-wing white population, the demographics of lawful firearm ownership is quite diverse. It's unlike affirmative action BE policy. This is not a planned diversification. This is something that just actually organically happened, and it was the case for a long time. So now you have to also ask, okay, which demographic are you afraid of? One specific one or all of them? Because you are trying to actually disarm bloody everybody, which creates the following problem. Only about 50% of all firearms in South Africa are licensed. The other 50%, this comes from the Global Small Arms Survey. They did a whole big study on the number of estimated firearms in countries worldwide, where they looked at the number of registered firearms and their estimate on number of unregistered or in illicit circulation. And they pinged South Africa between about 2.5 to 3 million illicitly owned unregistered firearms. And there were other studies that pinged it higher at about 6 million, but I'm going to go with about 3. And we only have 3 million registered. So only 50% of the guns in this country voluntarily submit to the Firearms Control Act of 2000. The other 50% of gun owners couldn't care less because they're all owning the stuff illegally. So the horns of the dilemma here is you're going, right, with the implications of this bill, you're looking at 3 million gun owners, potentially trying to criminalize them when you've got a pool of 3 million that are already criminalized that you're doing nothing for. And the big bugbear, the big boogeyman that they scare the public with is they say, okay, but there's about 7,000 guns that are stolen from private individuals and institutions every year, and this is feeding into the illegal pool. It's like, okay, let's put an asterisk next to that because that's not entirely accurate. Firstly, private sources is not just mom and dad or you and I with our self-defense guns or sport shooting guns. By the way, that would be a very bad source for criminals because you have to rob
A lot of people.
thousands of individual households in the hope of you getting a hold of a gun, and there's only about 4.5.
So where do you go?
Well, that's where you go. You go to the state armories,
Mm-hmm.
or you go to parastatals. So now the problem is, right, you've got security companies that own guns, and they might lose them in the course of performing their duties as policemen are also robbed of theirs. So you can't get too angry about that.
Yeah.
But then you have about 2.2 million state guns, of which not the majority are owned by the SAPs. You have ESCOM, PRASA, various other parastatals that have their own internal security divisions and their own firearms license under Section 20 of the Act that are counted as private gun owners. And Jenny Irish of the Institute of Security Studies, before her untimely passing, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, she did a bombshell report on there's 2.2 million guns in the South African government's possession, and only the SAPS report on where it is. And none of the other institutions that she requested data from could tell her where the guns were, how many they still had, and who were in possession of them. So there's about 2.2 million state-owned firearms out there that we don't know the status of, which not enough people are expressing concern about.
And the government at the same time is saying, you give me your guns, you can't defend yourself with your gun. Oh, by the way, I have no clue where 2.2 million of mine are.
That's exactly that. And then they say, well, you guys lose 7,000 guns a year, which we don't, but let's pretend we do. Let's go with that. It's like, okay, up until about 2018, the SAPS recovery rates of firearms reported stolen every year was close to 90%, meaning there's no real leakage into the existing illicit pool, very small. But let's say it's a full 7,000 a year, and there's a recovery rate of 0. That represents 0.2% of the lower end estimate of what's already in illegal circulation. It's not even a drop in the ocean. And now you have these great stories from the, not a story, it's a factual report from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime that details you have corrupt Namibian policemen running this great racket where they're taking Nampol, Namibian police pistols that have been decommissioned. They're not decommissioned. Fully automatic AK-47s and Uzis, and they're smuggling them directly to Cape Flat gangs over the border in flower trucks and stuff like that. And you go, and sure, that probably doesn't represent a massive flow in and of itself, but how many cross-border flows do we have?
Yeah.
And I have yet to see footage of a Zama Zama without them holding an AK. So there's clearly no shortage of these things. And it comes to the point where we have in South Africa a massive organized criminal industry. I'm going to call it an industrial sector because it's pervasive and it's everything. You can't sell fruit or veg next to the street in a township without paying an extortion mafia off or they kill you. You can't go in a television set in a township without paying somebody off or else they make an example out of you. We have taxi mafias and taxi warfare up the yin-yang. We have the normal Cape Flat gangs.
Yeah.
We have illegal mining cartels and syndicates. Any activity under the sun has its illegal, violent counterpart in the underworld. And all of that violence needs tools and implements for which to perpetrate it. So there is a demand for firearms because we have an out-of-control criminal industry that is, according to the Madlanga Commission, connected to the higher echelons of political power in South Africa.
So your bad guys are armed, and there are a lot of bad guys.
To the teeth.
And the government's answer is the good guys can't have guns. And there seems to be an intensified push for that. What do you think the consequence is if this bill were to get pushed through then to your various parties? And I know you've discussed a couple of them with me earlier. We're in comms with GIDEON, you're in comms with wildlife and the hunting department. What are all the different parties that are effective? What is the consequence across the board?
I'll go through all of them. I'm going to start with the first one, which is the general public.
Sure.
And the general public who are reliant either on themselves being the first responders to their personal emergency, as in the self-defense firearm owners or carriers, or people reliant on private security firms to protect them, you are suddenly not going to have that capacity anymore. And you'll be 100% reliant on the state, meaning 10111, and you hope that somebody arrives.
Have you got any understanding on the stats perhaps around response time by police?
Not the latest. A couple of years ago, the response times were measured in hours and not minutes. And if you have a personal emergency right now, you have seconds in which to resolve it. You don't have time to wait for the police either. And this is the interesting thing. The South African Police Service's constitutional mandate is all about securing the citizens and residents of the Republic against crime and violence, but in aggregate, not at personal individual level. A policeman can never be responsible for your personal safety. They can, at best, intercept criminals before they get to you through crime intelligence-driven operations, or they can arrive after the fact to try and investigate and then catch the people that did bad things to you. But in that moment, where you are being confronted by a violent criminal, it will always be you on your own, regardless of how good your police service is. So I just want to make sure that the viewers understand the fact that the police service isn't actually there to serve and protect in the individual level. They're there to serve and protect, if you forgive the Americanization of that term, in aggregate. So they look after society, not individuals. So you're always going to be on your own.
That's crazy. What a statement that nobody is coming to save you. In that moment, you're going to have to save yourself. And if you can't do that, the consequence is your own or your family's or your children's.
Because then you're at the mercy of very bad people who have made a career out of breaking the law. So that is the important implication. And to just further, now, before you and I had this chat, I had a corporate client that had an emergency where he was sitting with an employee that was in a potentially very nasty situation. And we were doing live monitoring for them, and they requested that we send them a armed security detail to go and extract this person. Now, we were in a position to do that, but thinking about what you and I are going to talk about, I realized at that point in time, should this bill pass, and I don't have the capacity to phone good men with guns to come and save him, what options am I giving him? And my response would be, unless your employee can get himself out of that situation, we are going to watch him on this TV screen, and this monitor, in this monitoring room, and we're going to watch them either get viciously assaulted or die. And there is nothing we can do about it, and there's no one we can send to help.
Because the bill is also starting to strip security companies of their ability to be effective as well.
Well, that's the thing. And I'll talk to you more about the ecosystem. So now we've talked about the private individual and the ordinary citizen and resident. Now I start moving to sports shooters and hunters. Now, sport shooting in South Africa is a massive undertaking. We have numerous federations, sport shooting federations that are registered with the Olympic body and the national bodies in which you can get provincial colors and national colors. And the sport shooters do go out there and compete internationally. And very often, and in fact, as a matter of course, they bring medals home. So it is prestigious. South Africa does well at international shooting competitions. In September, we held the International Practical Shooting Confederation's World Shoot. It's the second time that South Africa has hosted the World Shoot. It was 1,800 plus participants from over 50 countries. And it was a massive event and a huge success. And this is the level at which South Africans participate in sport shooting. And sport shooting isn't just, yes, it is a serious, almost professional level athletic pursuit, but it's also the foundational stone, probably the most important foundation to creating a responsible firearm culture in this country of lawfulness, responsibility, safety, accuracy, all those good things. It's the linchpin of the whole ecosystem, because what happens is a lot of people become first-time gun owners, and they don't know actually what to do next in order to develop and anchor their skill set, become safer, become more responsible, and learn. And the activity they generally tend to gravitate towards in order to do that is they join a shooting club or a sports shooting association and they begin participating in shooting sports. It's the same thing that we see a lot of private security officers do is in their spare time, and even policemen, they go do shooting sports, especially ones that are aligned closely to their daily jobs, because there's a wide variety of shooting sports. And they go and they anchor their skills and development while actually having fun at the same time. The shooting sports themselves, apart from being a legitimate sport and a legitimate element of national prestige, also feed into keeping the industry that supplies hunting, supplies private individuals, supplies security companies alive, because sports shooters buy guns, they buy equipment, they buy accessories and peripherals. And this keeps the dealerships and the actual firearm retail industry alive, that it can serve all the needs of everyone else. So sports shooting is incredibly important. It is vital. I would say that it's one of the most important activities on par with hunting, which is also why they're grouped together under Section 15 and 16. Hunting itself, the value of commercial hunting to the agricultural sector, it is part of the agricultural sector, was estimated by a Northwest University study earlier this year to be 44 billion rand a year. It's probably one of the single biggest sectors in agriculture, contributing to the welfare of that entire industry. And if you think about the impact of hunting on game conservation, which is something that we are all very intimately concerned with, and the environmental management of game, it would have a massive debilitating impact on that entire industry. Simple things like restricting the number of firearms you're allowed to own as a dedicated hunter or sports shooter, as they've done it arbitrarily. And I'll explain why they think that it's a good thing to do it. Suddenly removes your ability to have multiple calibers for multiple applications, for multiple participations. It strips from you the ability to actually, it will kill shooting sports and it will do devastating damage to hunting, as well as they want to criminalize you reloading your own ammunition at home.
Crazy.
Which, if you're a sports shooter, you need to reload in order, you need about 10 to 50,000 rounds a year downrange in order to be competitive. As a hunter,
finely tuned.
As a hunter, you are finely tuning your hand loads to your gun for highest accuracy, for the most ethical killing of your game animal. And there are other firearms that, frankly, commercially available ammunition is not available because of the scarcity of it. And unless you're loading for it, the gun is useless. The reason they wanted to restrict those firearm types is because someone came up with this bright idea that it's an unlimited gun loophole because the Act does not explicitly restrict the number of guns you're allowed to own under Section 16. What they don't tell you is that every single gun you want to own, you need to motivate in detail your legitimate need for that firearm, and the registrar of CFR gets to decide if you get to have it or not.
And I think we are already far further down the road in terms of where we should be on gun rights and ownership. I don't like the fact that it takes me 6 to 9 months to have a new gun in my possession. I think that is a pushback on my rights as an individual to be able to protect myself and equip myself in the way that I see fit. I think that's an overstep by government already. So the fact that we are this far along, it feels like we've given them the nail and they've started to take the arm. And I'm getting scared, to be very frank, as a civilian, as a father, as a man of outspoken opinion, that once they take my guns or make it harder to own my guns, that we will see the same thing happen in South Africa that the UK has seen happen over the last 10 years, whereby if I say something the government doesn't agree with, good chance of that the government steps out and takes me in for that. And I feel that if they were to disarm the public further, that becomes a real risk. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's a legitimate fear, or do you think that's an outright?
No, I think it is a legitimate fear, because any state that is paranoid enough to disarm its populace for the most unscientific and irrational reasons is certainly tyrannical enough to follow through on a whole bunch of other really terrible ideas. So I do not think your fears are unfounded. Also, what these people seem to forget is that we now live in the 21st century, where you already have the prolific 3D printing of working firearms from everywhere, from across Europe to the guerrillas in Myanmar who are busy fighting the government there right now that have equipped their people with this. The genie is out the bottle. You can't stop the signal. We're having this huge fight about restricting people who lawfully want to own guns and willfully submit themselves to the Act in order to do so.
Yeah.
This disproportionate focus on them, where we're ignoring the criminals and their access to guns are being sold to them by the state. And I think I made a naughty point earlier where I said, considering the Madlanga Commission's revelations, are we seeing high-level politicians that are so integrated in the criminal economy that they would rather disarm the civilians so that their criminal associates are just left with defenseless victims to make their jobs easier? Is that part of the thing? Is there something else to it? And it's entirely unconscionable. The reality is it ignores everything else that can happen. If you outlaw the guns, you just create a nation of outlaws, and it's not going to do anything good for law and order. It also ignores the fact that there are real solutions to the problems that are plaguing society, and there are real solutions to making gun control legislation actually work for the citizens in this country and not be a big stick to just beat them with and restrict them. I don't know if we ever spoke about the concept of license the person, register the firearm.
Tell me more.
So at the moment, you have a license card for every gun that you own. You have to renew this license card every 5 or 10 years. Huge amount of stacks of paperwork, massive administrative burden on the individual and on the South African Police Service. It creates a lack of transparency. It's opaque. And you can already see with corruption in the CFR, a guy like Kat Matlala has guns. How does he have guns with this criminal record? How does his unregistered security company have guns without having the necessary paperwork? Easy. He fraudulently purchased the licenses from CFR because the CFR itself is now criminally captured. So you're sitting with a criminally captured regulator that is getting away with it because there's no transparency and the system is easy to manipulate and all these sorts of things. If you boil it back down and say what you do is you as an individual as a license holder, like a driver's license, and you just simply register your guns on the system that you buy and own. And if you have a Section 16, you have the legitimate need for those guns, you register them on the system, and now what does it do? It frees up resources for the police to audit you as an individual, to audit itself, to make sure that the system actually does what it's supposed to do in the first place, which is really just to keep guns out the hand of bad people.
Yes.
That's all it should be doing, is it should be keeping guns out of the hands of criminal individuals, and that should be it. It's now being obviously used as a political tool to disarm people because the state doesn't like private citizens having the capacity for force, and it wants to try and grab back the monopoly of violence. That ship has sailed. The South African state will never reobtain the monopoly on violence, and the easy way to see that is just look at the scale of the criminal underworld and say, if anyone is close to having the monopoly on violence in South Africa, it's those guys, unfortunately.
What are your thoughts on how one could perhaps go about having an impact on violent crime in the country? What would your steps be? If you're saying taking on the legal gun owners isn't the way to do it, what would your answer be? How do we do that?
Make crime expensive. Attach consequences for criminal actions, because at the moment, there are none. So I'm going to ask you a question quickly. What do you think is our successful conviction rate for homicide, for murder at the moment?
Less than 5%.
It's not quite as bad, but under 10. Okay, it's under 10%, which is bad, meaning you have about a 91% chance of getting away with murder every year.
What does that stat entail? Does that stat entail that you're in court and then saying, is the trial going to be successful? Or is it saying,
it's a
what
trial
are the
is successful.
chances we're going to catch the guy who kills someone?
So the chances of catching you, the police actually solving the crime, I think, was about 12 to 13%. And then the NPA boasts a successful prosecution rate of 80%. What they don't tell you is that the 80% successful prosecution rate is on 12% of cases annually, which means that only about 9% get successfully prosecuted. So that is the problem with murder. Now you look at rape. Rape's worse. I think the last time I checked, it was about a 6% successful conviction rate of all reported cases. And trio crimes, when you talk about vehicle hijacking, robbery residential premises, and robbery at non-residential premises, do you want to guess the conviction rate for those on average?
I'm going to guess around the same, between 5 and 10%.
2.5. So we just do not convict armed robbers. We just do not send them to prison. It's something that you get away with over and over and over again.
So just no consequence to the perpetrator.
No consequences. And there are many reasons for it. Okay, the criminal justice system is broken. You can see it in the courts, you can see it in the prosecuting authority, and you can see it in the police. I mean, you have detectives sitting with 300 dockets on their desk, meaning that if the guy spends 5 minutes on each docket, just making an annotation every week to say, I haven't further investigated this yet, I'll get back to it. That means he spends a full working day out of his week just doing that. It's unworkable. There's no chance of you solving any meaningful crime there unless it's the very serious high-profile stuff. You have a 22% public trust level in the SAPS because of these guys not solving crimes, which means you have an underreporting of crime. Because
Sure.
if the public does not trust the authorities, it's not going to report crime to the authorities.
The only reason that I report a crime is to get the case number for my insurer.
Yeah. That is exactly, I think, what it is. No one actually expects the crime to be solved or you to get your property back because the police were good at locating the criminals. So what you have to do is you need to fix policing. Again, we're coming back to exactly what the research report said, is you need to fix policing urgently. You need to fix prosecutions urgently. You need to fix the courts and the correctional services so that you have a process where you can take a violent criminal offender off the street quickly after they've offended, and then you lock them up for as long as you need to lock them up so that they're removed from society as not a danger. And if they're not rehabilitable, then you keep them in bloody prison.
Yeah.
And you put them to work. You old school chain gang, you get these guys to build roads or infrastructure or whatever so that they can earn their keep, because if you have hundreds of thousands of criminals sitting in prisons that need to be paid on the taxpayers' rands and cents,
Utilize them.
you need to also get value for the system. And if you're a humanitarian, you say, well, at least they're also earning some form of, there's some skills acquisition that's happening,
Sure.
and there's an element of discipline.
Yeah.
But for all of this to happen, there needs to be, and this is the hard part, there needs to be actual leadership from the top of this country.
That was going to be my thoughts as well. We need top-down action. You can't expect the lower rungs of the system to conform to trauma values if your leadership isn't. Unfortunately, we're in a society, in a country where our leaders are obviously criminal in their behavior when not incompetent as well. And I think I agree with you. That is where we need to start. We need to start at the top. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on your responsibility as a father and as a husband, as a legal gun owner, to be able to protect your family, and what losing that right, because the bill directly attacks self-defense as a reason, as a justification for owning a firearm, what that'll mean for you as a man and as a father and as a husband.
I'm glad you asked this question, because this is something that has been weighing on my mind for a considerable amount of time. The unshakable truth of it is, the moment you become a husband, you are in partnership with another person for hopefully the rest of your life. And there are bonds of trust and responsibility between you and the other person that require a great number of obligations and duties and commitments to be made. And one of those is being fully committed to the welfare of that other person, to an extent where you possibly, not in an unhealthy way, in the healthy manner, place their welfare above your own. Exponentially more so the moment you have a child. So it's not a simple moral duty. It's a solemn obligation to be directly responsible for the welfare of that child. And that pertains to their education, their nourishment, their clothing, love, teaching them the ways of the world, being everything can be to be a responsible parent and guardian, but also to be their protector. And this includes very much a protector against criminal violence or other violence or state-sanctioned violence. And unfortunately, we live in a century where we're not walking around with swords and pikes and lances and daggers anymore. Technology has advanced, and the modern day version of a sword or a dagger is a handgun or a rifle.
Yeah.
And it has been such since, the gunpowder revolution. Your best tool with which to protect innocent life from violence is a firearm.
Yeah.
And when it reaches the point where I'm being specific and saying protecting life, because the moment something becomes life-threatening, it requires the most urgent and forceful response possible in order to prevent harm to innocent life. And there is nothing that fills the gap that a firearm fills. There's nothing that comes close.
When we talk about protection and the masculine responsibility to protect, it goes hand in hand with provision. And I often ask leaders throughout the country, generally pastoral leadership amongst churches, we have this responsibility to provide. And pastors are very happy to look at that responsibility as an active role. In other words, I have to go out every day to earn. I don't wait for my bank account to hit zero before I go out to find some money. It's an active role that on the daily, I work towards. I train myself towards, I upskill myself towards, and I put effort towards this role, this responsibility of being the provider. Wouldn't you perhaps argue that protecting is the same, that it needs to be an active role rather than a passive role? So I don't just get an alarm system and hope that the police get to me in time. That I say, hey, perhaps a firearm is the most effective way to protect myself, and that I should be upskilling myself towards that. What are your thoughts around that idea?
No, absolutely, because the average person is fully capable of becoming a knowledgeable, highly skilled, very safe, very proficient firearm owner that's capable of utilizing that tool to protect their life or the life of any other innocent person over which they feel responsible and they feel necessary to protect. And it has to be an active role. And I think one of the sticky points one may have when you get into religious debates with theologians and ministers is that they feel very strongly about the role of being the provider, but there's not all that so much unanimity regarding their sentiments about armed self-defense. And I think the best argument I have against that position is to say, well, if I'm expected to, by the sweat of my brow, earn my daily bread, because you don't expect things to be given to you, right? No Christian that I've met sits on his backside every day and saying, well, God's just going to look after me. It would be the most perverse thing. Like I've yet to meet anyone that looked at scripture that way. Yet at the same time, you say, if I am valuable in the sense that I have to perform good works on earth, not for the salvation of my soul, but because they're necessary to be done. There's something I want to do. And if I need to look after myself and my family as a result of this, then is it not a great betrayal of that responsibility and obligation to say, well, I care so little for my welfare in my life that I refuse to defend it against bad people trying to kill me?
I'll just hope for the best.
I just hope for the best. I think that level of pacifism is a direct contradiction of everything else that precedes it in the belief system. We need to be consistent in our...
It's apathetic.
It's apathetic, exactly.
It's perhaps cowardly. And I think that the word, the Bible seems to speak out harshly against cowardice and the lazy and the apathetic. So I agree with you. I like that point. And I think it may be the consequence of, and excuse the word here, the pussification of the Christian man. And people get caught up when I call Christians pussies, but the word is actually not a swear word. I can tell you where it derives from. It is the shortening of pusillanimous, which is a dictionary word. You can go and Google it.
No, I've heard of it, but I forgot the exact definition, but you are definitely going to educate me on it.
To call somebody a pussy means that they are without spirit, without determination, without courage. And so it's a word that's been bastardized, but was a Christian insult to the uninitiated, to those without spirit. It was actually one of the OG Christian insults to say, you're a bit of a pussy. Well, it means that they are without spirit, without courage, and without determination. And I think, unfortunately, that word has come back around, and I'm trying to bring it back. I think we need to be able to call
reclaim it.
We're going to reclaim it. We're going to start calling the weak and the timid and the cowardly. We're going to start calling them what they are, a bunch of pussies. So I'm bringing my word back. We just launched it. It was a bit of a hard launch. Hope you guys liked it. And I think that's what's happening to the man today. I think that he has started to neglect responsibility, and the justification seems to be there for men who protect. And I struggle to reconcile the attitude of the man today that seems to advocate, it seems to abandon that position. Do you think that there is perhaps a character issue in the man of today? Should we be making men more aggressive? Do they need more buy-in? What do you think the problem is amongst men that they're not taking a hold of that responsibility?
I think the problem likely originates in the fact that if you look at the global rise in the Anglosphere world, at least, of the nanny state, right, is where the government becomes daddy or mummy, and it becomes husband or wife, and it becomes the provider in chief. And the direct implication of that, where the state starts fulfilling roles that it was never designed to do, is you start taking initiative, self-reliance, self-responsibility, and drive directly away from people. It is, in fact, a form of enslavement, because you are making people directly dependent on the government as the provider of all things: economic welfare, of safety and security, of education, you name it. And And unfortunately, it's not just unique that you can say, well, this is purely the government's fault. Unfortunately, the population also decided to vote for these things because of some misplaced, probably utopian ideal. The fact is, the implication that has on men is men no longer do things that men were supposed to do. We have deferred responsibility to the state. The one thing, though, that you do learn in Business Management 101 is that you can always defer responsibility to anybody, but you can never defer accountability. And the problem is when the ship goes sideways or the train leaves the tracks or horrible things start happening, whether it's criminal violence or economic apocalypse or whatever, you've deferred your responsibility to the state who's failed you. But who's going to be accountable for the consequences of that happening? You're going to be the one paying for it. And it might be a life lesson that is terminal and you're not going to get to learn anything out of it. So it's important for people to become aware that the so-called manosphere, I prefer having a positive connotation to saying the resurgence, hopefully, of traditional masculinity is something that needs to happen not because men see themselves as aggressive, superior alpha predators, or what do you call it, apex predators. It's sometimes nice to think of ourselves. My wife allows me to think of myself like that about once a week or twice a week. I a little bit get away with it, but it's after I wash the dishes usually.
Put your night vision goggles
on. Exactly. It's the case of we need to have a healthy relationship with what are our responsibilities and obligations towards ourselves, towards our families, towards our greater communities and the people we associate with, that goes beyond the overly individualistic self, and actually reclaim those responsibilities and tasks from the state and say, it's not your job to be doing this.
Fair.
This is actually my job.
Yeah.
And if you would kindly get out of the way, thank you very much. And I think one way that's great about what you're doing is you're actually engaging directly with the youth on this, because they're growing up in a school system where, and this is not designed to be an insult to educators or teachers, but the system is one that says you enter at age 4 and we put you on a track and in a box, and you're going to be, regardless of your shape, you're going to be molded to conform to the standard. And that by the time you get out of that system and you enter university or any other form of tertiary or post-school qualification, you've been molded into the perfect little economic unit.
That's it.
Right? That mold needs to be broken. I don't think it's good. I think it worked great during the Industrial Revolution. And it worked great when the public school system just became a thing where you had absolute legions of illiterate and illiterate people in the 17 and 1800s that desperately needed some form of formal education.
But everything has evolved from the phone to the car, and yet our school system stays very much the same.
The school system stays the same. The outcomes of the school system stay exactly the same. And unfortunately, the political implications of that are visible in the fact that we are becoming less independent, less proactive, less involved, and almost less cerebral. We tend to think less about difficult things, probably than we did a good couple of generations ago. And that is not a good thing.
Gideon, if I can ask you one last question. If you had one day as president of South Africa, what would you do to change the country around? Where would you start? Give me your elevator pitch.
I don't think there's a single thing that I would do. It's many things in one package. The first thing I do is I would get rid of anything that's business unfriendly in this country. Every piece of legislation, every policy, anything that makes it difficult for people to do business here. Because a great deal of our problems can be directly traced to the state of the economy. And I would get government far out the way with that. With regards to individual rights and responsibilities, whether it's firearms, whether it is looking after your city, your neighborhood, your community, I would largely reform how these processes are being done and get rid of the government roadblocks that stop people actually looking after their own towns, neighborhoods, all this sort of stuff, and say, it's safety and security is a mess. I don't know if I can reform the South African Police Service, but I would make a plan to at least devolve what I can where I can, and that's just my big picture, messy overview, and actually start a process of taking this back to basics and saying, Pelian principles. You cannot police a community without its consent, and the police are the community are the police. Right? That would be this. So economics, safety and security, and criminal justice system, reform that stuff bloody urgently.
Yeah.
And the third one is just reset our international relations. because
I've got some work to do there.
Because the cheapest way of getting the first two things done is hordes of foreign direct investment and buy-in from other people. It doesn't mean we need to suck up to any specific country, but we can at least stop having unnecessary fights with ones.
I agree. And so last thing, Gideon, we came on to speak about this gun control amendment bill that's trying to be being pushed through by NEDLAC. You're traveling up tomorrow to go and listen to the table discussion on this. How do South African citizens get involved? What can we do to fight back against what's currently being pushed through?
There's three things they can do. First one, even if you're not a gun owner, join any firearm rights and ownership representative organization. There are hordes of them. I am with the South African Gun Owners Association. So I'm going to tell you to join South African Gun Owners Association. We're the green guys, saga.org.za. But if you don't like me and if you don't like Saga, there are plenty. Just join any of them. Just join whoever, because we all work together and we're pulling in the same direction. And that's the important part. The second thing is become politically active. So write to your legal representatives, phone them, WhatsApp them, pester them. Whether it's my dear friend Ian Cameron at the Portfolio Committee on Police, blow up his inbox. All his parliamentary email addresses are public. Write to the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen. Write to the Minister of Sport, Gayton McKenzie. Write to the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs, Willie Oukamp. Write to Parks Tower at that it would be the Department of Trade and Industry. And just assail them with your concerns and objections. And even write to NEDLAC. So join an organization, become politically active and involved. And the third one, most important one, is keep our ecosystem alive. Become a lawful, responsible gun owner. Buy a gun, train with it, practice with it, start doing shooting sports. If you want to hunt for biltong, but become part of the family. So those three steps are all immediately actionable. And if anyone needs information, they can get a hold of me via Saga, or they can go to my personal blog, paratus.info, read up a bit there, or find me on X under my handle, and I'm happy to point them in the right direction.
Fantastic. You can also sign the petition at freesa.za.org.
Thank you. They are great people. I did not mean to forget about them.
That's
very important. Yes, yes, very much.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Good chat to you.
Thank you.
Cheers.